This summer, it'll be 3 years since we first learned about Breath of the Wild's sequel, with the mysterious teaser trailer delving into the darkness below Hyrule's surface. Currently, the game is pegged to release in the spring of next year, around 6 years after the release of the original. So I'm beyond excited to see what this game is about, and hopefully we'll get another look sometime this summer. But until then, all we can do is speculate. So let's speculate. Let's run through a list of 7 things that I'd love to see in the game that we still have to call Breath of the Wild 2. So obviously, Breath of the Wild's sequel will have a heavy emphasis on the skies above Hyrule, now apparently littered with giant floating islands. Link can launch himself upwards through these islands with an ability thanks to his new magical hand, which will allow him to use them to climb higher and higher into the sky. To get down, not only can Link paraglide just like in the original game, but skydive. And patents filed by Nintendo show that he'll be able to switch between a few different positions while plummeting from above. Normal falling, diving falling, backward falling, and a high velocity dive. Not only this, but it seems he'll be able to use his bow as he falls in almost any direction, suggesting that aerial combat is on the cards. If this is indeed the case, then the game can't pass up on the opportunity for aerial boss fights, fought as Link and his adversary drop through the clouds. The original game toyed with this idea in the fights against Naydra and Varmado, but the sequel's setting and new mechanics could add a huge amount of depth to boss fights in the skies. Link has historically been something of a blank slate character. He lacks a voice and much of a personality in order for the player to better relate to and identify with him and better immerse themselves in his journey. For the most part, this works well, especially in games like Ocarina of Time where Link is a complete stranger to nearly every character he encounters, and much of the game's story can be relayed to him through dialogue. But in Breath of the Wild, Link was already an incredibly important character long before the game's events. He was the Hylian champion, the princess's chosen knight. Of course, he doesn't remember this until he discovers his lost memories, which allows the player to learn about his history alongside the character. But now, with the sequel, we're building further on this same Link, and continuing his story. Unless he somehow loses his memory again, Link will be just as aware of Hyrule's story and his role in it as we are. There's an interesting note in Zelda's diary that explains that Link chooses to keep silent because of the incredible responsibility that rests on his shoulders. With so much at stake, and with so many eyes on him, he chooses to stop outwardly expressing his feelings, which is a really fascinating explanation for Link's silence, and adds a layer of depth to the character. So, though I'd still prefer Link to remain a silent protagonist that the player can easily relate to, I'd love to see his character explored further, and for this iteration of the hero to become slightly less of a blank slate. Perhaps we could learn more about his father, the unnamed Hylian knight, or how Link feels and reacts to the discovery of ancient, horrifying truths about his kingdom. Some of Breath of the Wild's most iconic enemies are actually reimagined versions of classic Zelda enemies, like the Hinox or the Lynel, both enemies that, until 2017, had yet to appear in a 3D Zelda game. Even the Guardians were initially designed as a callback to the Octoroks in the original game, though the developers went with a high-tech theme because they thought giant octopuses crawling around Hyrule would be gross. So, in the sequel, I'd love to see more classic enemies reimagined for this massive new iteration of Hyrule. Maybe the boomerang-throwing Gorilla, the bull-like Taros, or the aggressive River Zora could make their 3D debut. Or perhaps we'll see new versions of the Darknut or Iron Knuckle, or Redeads and Gibdos. Depending on how dark the sequel will be, maybe even monsters like Dead Hand or Wall Masters could lurk in the depths below Hyrule's surface. It's almost certain that we'll see the return of at least a handful of classic Zelda enemies in the sequel, and I'm so excited to see them. When developing the first Legend of Zelda game, the dungeons were designed as tiles that fit together, to include as many dungeons in as little memory space as possible. However, director Takashi Tezuka made a mistake, and only ended up using half of the total available memory, and so the team decided to develop the second quest, a version of the game with different dungeons in new locations in the overworld. It's unlocked after beating the regular game, or as a little secret, by naming your file Zelda. The second quest has since become a staple of the series. Adventure of Link featured one, though the game remains much the same. Ocarina of Time got Master Quest, a mirrored version with different dungeon layouts, and The Wind Waker got a second quest where Link runs through the whole game in his Outset Island clothes, can understand ancient Hylian, has the deluxe Picto box from the start, and more. Skyward Sword was originally planned to feature a second quest where the player controlled Zelda during her adventure with Impa on the surface. We can see clips of what this would have looked like during the credits, but the idea was ultimately dropped. And of course, Breath of the Wild has the Master Mode DLC, where enemies are tougher and recover health, and additional monsters can be found across Hyrule, including on floating Octoballoon platforms. But this is more similar to the Hero Mode featured in a few Zelda games, where enemies deal more damage and recovery hearts are harder to come by. But for the sequel, I'd love to see something more like a traditional second quest, a mode unlocked immediately after beating the game that mixes things up for a second run through. Perhaps that's with alternate dungeon layouts, new secrets like the Wind Waker's ancient Hylian, or something else. Now, this is going to sound quite petty, but a major disappointment of Breath of the Wild for me was the game's title screen. This is obviously the first thing a new player experiences when booting up the game, and previous 3D Zeldas have capitalized on this with some truly gorgeous titles. Ocarina of Time opens with a somber, haunting scene following Link riding Epona at night. Majora's Mask shows us Clocktown and its residents before ominously panning up to the moon. The Wind Waker has Outset Island and its surrounding waters set to the game's beautiful main theme. Twilight Princess has an epic title screen that calls back to Ocarina of Time, with Link riding across Hyrule at dusk. Skyward Sword unfortunately broke this trend somewhat. It plays the origin story of Demise, but then the actual title screen is just the logo set on a background of the sky with no music. But even this is miles better than what we got with Breath of the Wild, which instead has this. A static screen with the logo and options cycling through various illustrations. No music, no special intro cutscene, just artwork. I've seen people online suggest before that they could have opted for a title screen a bit like this, showing off the game's main focus, the new world of Hyrule. As it stands though, Breath of the Wild's title screen is uninteresting and flat, and I hope that this is something the sequel changes, whether by returning to a grand cinematic opening or a more low-key, dynamic title screen. Recently, alongside the delay, series producer IG Aonuma mentioned that the sequel will take place not only in Hyrule and the skies above, but that the expanded world goes beyond that. Obviously, we can expect at least some of the game to take place underground, where Link and Zelda encounter the mummified Ganondorf, but where else could this new quest take us? An exciting possibility is the seas beyond Hyrule. The country is bordered on the south and east by an ocean, and while we can sail to nearby islands like Eventide on a raft, anything further out is blocked off by an invisible wall. But there are suggestions of islands out past this point. The simple raft is the only way to sail in Breath of the Wild, which is a shame. It feels fine for crossing rivers and lakes, but seems a strange and gimmicky way to sail the seas. I'd love to see the sequel include larger ships, perhaps a proper sailboat akin to the King of Red Lions, to let Link journey across the waves to lands unknown. Breath of the Wild, of course, takes place 100 years after the apocalypse, when Ganon returned and set Hyrule aflame. Because of this, much of the game's story is told by the world itself. Hyrule's ruins give us a glimpse at what came before, and let us piece together the events of the Great Calamity. Like how near Kakariko Village we can find the husks of 3 guardians surrounding the charred remains of a building, suggesting it's perhaps the ruins of something like a bomb shop that exploded when attacked, taking the Sheikah machines with it. Another fantastic example of this is how Zelda mentions that silent princess flowers can't be grown domestically, that it only thrives in the wild. As well as symbolizing the nature of Zelda herself, the flower symbolizes the wilderness, and a century later, we can find one growing in Zelda's study, representing the fact that Hyrule has fallen and the castle has been overtaken by the wild. It's not a controversial take to claim that Hyrule itself is far, far more interesting than the sterile, monotone Sheikah shrines. While this contrast is intentional and important, the player spends such a huge amount of time underground in these trials, which feature next to none of the game's otherwise brilliant environmental storytelling. Assuming the sequel follows a similar structure of having an overworld populated with mini dungeons, I'd love to see these dungeons designed in a way that allows the player to learn about their history and stories simply by looking around. Thanks for watching this video. What do you want to see from Breath of the Wild's sequel? Let me know in the comments below. Cheers guys, and I'll see you next time.